So I want to wrap up this part of the class by talking about water. As I have emphasized several times, forests tend to be limited by three factors: light, nutrients, and water. So let's talk about water specifically. There are two problems that forests confront, and one is that it can be difficult to grow in an environment where there is too much water, where the environment is inundated all the time. There's an example from Florida where you have swamp forests. Swamp forests are actually not just a thing in the south. They occur in the northern and more northern latitudes as well. And this is this example from Maine that I like to show. This is a very wet area, and some of it is quite boggy. One of the problems that trees have is that when there are plenty of forests that occur in swamps, but in order to persist there, trees must overcome the problem of having roots that are wet all the time. And in order to uptake water, trees need oxygen in those roots in order to move water. So the trick and the adaptation the adaptations are all related to getting water into the roots, or actually tolerating water scarcity, because it's difficult to get in when it's in the lack of oxygen. So in general, trees deal with moisture scarcity in different ways. In general, and this is true outside of swamps, but generally when you increase soil moisture, you increase productivity. And that's because water becomes less limiting. Now, trees have different ways of dealing with this. Much of it is phenological, changing the rates of photosynthesis or the rates of carbon dioxide uptake in different times of the year, particularly absorbing more carbon when moisture is more available. So plants, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, plants are dynamic organisms even though they don't move around. They are constantly adapting to or adjusting to changes in the environment within years and between days and so forth. Now, you still tend to have the best productivity in the areas that have the most soils that are the most productive soils, the soils that hold the most water and have the most efficient drainage and so forth. But plants are not without ways of dealing with those changes. Here's an example. This is giant sequoia. Giant sequoia actually adjusts the amount of carbon uptake throughout the course of the day, and that is a response to water availability within the plant. So like I say, even though you can't see it without measuring it, plants are dynamic within days and within years and so forth. Now, we've talked about shade tolerance and how it can confer an advantage to some plants. Trees also vary in how efficient they are in using water. That can confer an advantage. But just like shade tolerance, it's also a trade-off. Water use efficiency, this is a way of, there's a way of using this, estimating a ratio of how much productivity is gained for each molecule of water. It's helpful for comparing plants, but it also is a kind of trade-off. The higher a plant, typically the higher the water use efficiency of a particular plant, the lower its productivity, and vice versa. So where would one expect low water use efficiency to be beneficial? Well, just like shade tolerance, it's in the places where the resource is most abundant. So in areas where water is abundant, such as riparian areas, those forests may be dominated by species that have low water use efficiency, like black cottonwood. And that's because water is not limiting there. So it's worthwhile to sacrifice water use efficiency in order to maximize growth. Cottonwoods grow really fast. They also are not very water use efficient. Now compare that with creosote bush, this woody plant that dominates the Mojave Desert, has extremely high water use efficiency, and it dominates in some of the least hospitable soils around. Very dry desert, but very sandy desert soils. And yet it has the right adaptations for that environment. When you look across the landscape, much of the patterns that you are seeing are reflecting various kinds of limitations. And here's an example of an aspen stand growing on the west shores of Convict Lake. This is a wet area. It's these trees, which are not very water use efficient, do well here because there's a lot of water. Now, one of our biggest concerns with water availability, and this is where we have the intersection of many of our problems in forest ecology, is the increased frequency and severity of drought. These appear to be associated with, to be part of global change, and they threaten much of the resiliency of our forests. This is a serious problem. It's one that's happening now. It's transforming our forests. Much of our tree mortality events are associated with it, and those problems interact with the other challenges that we're facing in forests, such as fire and really specifically fire in the West. And just to emphasize one more time, this is a photograph from the south of Portugal, another area where drought is transforming forest composition and productivity. This is a problem, ongoing, one that we have not really gotten a very sufficient answer about what to do about.